Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me tonight. I have got the most amazing story for you that you are just going to love. It's a story that is going to warm the very cockles of your heart, because it just really makes you feel that there are creatures out there that really have saved human lives. And in this case, Bigfoot saved the day and rescued this woman from a car wreck. And something that the jaws of life would normally have had to do in hazardous, icy conditions. Can you imagine that? So this is a story that is going to blow your mind. And I'm so grateful to the listener for sending me this story. I really appreciate it so very much, because it took guts to tell it. Anyway, let's get started. But before we do, please will you subscribe to my channel, because I've got so many stories that you don't want to miss out on, not for 1 minute. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Heidi and I'm initially from Fairbanks, Alaska. But a few years ago in 2015, I got married to my fiancé Jeff, and we moved to a remote cabin 2 hours away from Fairbanks. I wanted to be close to my parents who lived there, you see. If my husband had his way, we would live out in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness where there are no roads, and the only way you can get to these places is by using a super cub or beaver, which are small Alaskan planes that fly over parts of Alaska that you can't get to by road. My husband has never been a people's person, so when we married, no one was more surprised than his friends. He's the kind of person that can survive in the most arduous conditions, and he loves the rough Alaskan lifestyle, and also enjoys being cut off completely from the material world and people. Moving at close proximity to Fairbanks was not to his fancy, but thankfully we managed to find a cabin that was remote enough to keep Jeff happy. It is situated in a beautiful wild part of Alaska. This was a huge compromise on Jeff's part, but one he was willing to make on my account, just so that I wasn't too far away from my parents' abode. One night I slept over in my Fairbanks childhood home where I grew up. This was because my father was celebrating his birthday, and all my old friends were invited to celebrate. It was so wonderful seeing my friends again, because being married to the reclusive type means that socializing is not always on the cards, and something that I miss out on a lot. The one thing great about Alaska is that everyone fits in here and is accepted and loved by the community, who are so easygoing and totally amazing. I decided to leave my parents' home during the late afternoon the following day, after I fully recovered from the party of the previous night. I was travelling to our cabin to get home to Jeff. It was bitterly cold out there, and the temperature was minus 52 degrees below zero. I was driving one of Jeff's Dodge Chargers that really is akin to driving in these rough, hazardous environmental conditions, so typical of cold Alaskan winters. I had grown used to driving in these chaotic and treacherous conditions on Alaskan roads, because it's a way of life out here for me, and it was something that I was used to. However, nothing had prepared me for the blizzard-like conditions I was suddenly facing on this occasion. The punneling winds battered against my car windows, and my whole car seemed to wobble under the intense pressure of those heavy winds. The misty, foggy atmosphere was getting worse as the snow started to fall heavily on the ground. My car seemed to be slipping and sliding all over the place, despite my steady brakes and the great traction from my strong all-weather tires. I was driving in these hazardous conditions without another car in sight, on a remote road, when it suddenly happened. My car just skidded, rolled, and then somersaulted over a deep mountainous incline into the valley below. Suddenly everything just blanked out for me, because I have no recall of that final impact, because by then I was unconscious and badly injured. I was in that kind of state of slipping in and out of consciousness all the time, and I barely opened my eyes, but I do faintly recall the heavy sound of metal being pulled back and feeling the relief that help had finally come. I could feel myself being lifted out of that car and carried in these huge, comforting, warm arms at about 6 feet off the ground. So whoever was carrying me was at least 8 foot tall at the very least. I kept fighting to open my eyes to see what was going on around me, but my eyelids kept fighting me and kept closing, and try as I might, I couldn't stop the urge to sleep, and invariably I kept losing the battle to remain conscious. But now and then I was alert enough to pick up some information about my rescuers. Whoever was carrying me was exceedingly tall and had a definite male energy about him. His whole body was extremely warm and comforting and was covered with hair. I do remember it to be a deep tawny brown colour, and it didn't smell too great. I just have not got the heart to say how bad it did smell, but it was pretty rough. I was comforted by the creature's face, even though it had a primate look to it. There was also something distinctly human about it. Those eyes were brown and cheerful, and in an unconscious state were the kindest eyes I've ever seen. The creature looked at me with such deep concern, and I heard a voice in my head saying to me, "You're going to be just fine." I do remember waking up in a place that was incredibly warm and cozy. I was in a nest of dry leaves and soft hay, lying close to a delightfully warm, crackling fire. I think it felt like I was in some kind of enclosed den, like cave. The ceiling looked like it was made out of rock. I could see the outline of these creatures all in the background, tall, big and wide, and they were chattering to each other, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, in an excited way. The female energy stepped forward and put some snow into my mouth, I suppose to quench my thirst, and every time I would awaken, there she was again, still putting more snow in my mouth. Her energy was very gentle, serene and sweet. I think there was also a little female hairy creature who was about 3 foot in height, and she just stood fascinated and stared at me with big brown soulful eyes. It seemed that I was a subject of huge interest to her and intrigue. Once again I remember those big large arms lifting me up from the fireside and taking me outside and walking me for quite some time. I could feel the cold air throbbing painfully against my pale face. Finally, the creature came to a place where he put me on the ground, and suddenly I felt the icy blasts of cold air engulf me as he detached his warm body from my clutches. With gargantuan hands, the creature rapped on the wooden door several times, and then vanished from my sight, leaving me there on the doorstep. A man came to the door of his cabin to find me in a heaped bundle outside his cabin door. Apparently he called out an emergency cub, and I was flown to a hospital, and days later, when I did finally gain full consciousness, it had been 2 weeks since my accident. I had undergone multiple surgeries for fractured bones, and my head had received a nasty blow that was the cause of me drifting in and out of consciousness for most of the time. Luckily, I didn't lose my memory. It was a while before Jess' car was finally recovered, and no one knew how I physically got out of that car alive, because it was a complete write-off and required the jaws of life to get me out. They did not know who could have ripped the metal back to drag me out of that car, and that mystified the authorities, because they said it wasn't humanly possible for a man to do that. But strange things happen in Alaska all the time, so we've kind of got used to the unexplainable here. They also did not know how in my state I could have got out of the spot where I was found, because covered with snow it would have been very treacherous to climb over the mountainous ledge to the road. Furthermore, the icy Arctic conditions, unrelenting winds and snowfall should have caused me to ultimately freeze to death. They also could not understand how I'd found my way to that man's cabin that was miles away from the original accident. After my accident, the memories of my conscious state during my accident did come flooding back. Those moments when I did have consciousness, no matter how brief it might have been. And I realized that my life was saved by a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. The creature took me to his cave and lit a fire to keep me warm. These creatures know how to make fire. I know that sounds crazy for an animal, but I promise you it's true. I remember that fire vividly. I was also nursed by the female and studied by the curious youngster. Then the male Bigfoot took me all the way to a cabin where he knew I would get help. That shows how intelligent these Bigfoot really are. I bet he hid behind the trees watching to make sure that the man who lived in the cabin got me some help. And if that man didn't get me help, he would have taken me somewhere else where I would have got it. That's how determined he was to help me. I'm sure of that. You may know by my story that I do live in the Alaskan Triangle, and many people go missing here every year. Some people say that Bigfoot may account for some of Alaska's missing people, but in my case, Bigfoot rescued me and saved my life. I would not be alive to tell my story today if that Bigfoot had not pulled me out of that crumpled heap of steel. How he got me out of that and ripped open the steel was incredulous, because normally it would have taken the jaws of life to retrieve me from that wreck. I only told my husband Jeff what happened and how the Bigfoot rescued me, but I never told anyone else. Jeff said I should not tell other people because of all the doubters, cynics and disbelievers out there that may trash my story, and that this is what makes people like myself reluctant to come forward to tell our true accounts of our encounters with the hairy man. I did go back to the crash site with Jeff with a huge gift box for the Bigfoots because they truly saved my life. I got them some warm blankets for their cozy cave, 3 drinking mugs for water, and I got them bananas, apples, grapes, beef jerky, a huge bag of mixed nuts, a box of fruit and nut biscuits, granola bars, and for the little one I got her some pretty marbles. I do not know if they will have found the gifts, but I put a photograph of myself on the box with a thank you note. I thought that they would recognize the parcel was from me by the photograph. Jeff believes there may be lots of unknown species here in the wilderness of Alaska, so much of it that has been undiscovered and unexplored. He also believes a lot of people have had encounters with the hairy man, but like me, they don't want to talk because of the ridicule and abuse they will receive from the non-believers. So there you are, that's my story, and believe me, it's taken me guts to tell it. But thank you for enabling me to remain anonymous. Yours truly, Heidi. Heidi, I just want to say thank you for that incredible story. I'm so grateful you sent it to me, and I'm very grateful for people who've had the courage to come forward with their stories, because there are doubters out there. There are people who disbelieve these kind of accounts. And I don't know if that had happened to me, whether I would have told anyone. I doubt it very much, unless I really trusted that the person would believe me. I do believe that there are animals out there that save human lives. And I do believe that there are some exceptional Bigfoots out there that really have the kindest hearts, because I'm getting that all the time from the letters that people are sending me. I'm definitely getting the feeling that there are different personality types with these creatures. And there are some incredibly kind ones that generous and love human beings. But there are others that are terribly foreboding. Anyway, until next time, goodbye and good night.